Meine sehr geehrten Damen und Herren, wir möchten beginnen. Es ist mir eine Freude, dass Sie ihr alle da sind. Zu Beginn ein Hinweis auf die Übersetzung. So there will be translation. 1 Français, 2 Deutsch, 3 Englisch, 4 Espanol. Dann haben Sie die Möglichkeit, das jeweils in Ihrer eigenen Sprache zu hören. Für diejenigen, die uns über den YouTube-Kanal zuschauen, dort wird live der englische Sprachkanal übertragen. Später wird das im Nachhinein noch durch die anderen Sprachen ergänzt werden. Ich darf Sie herzlichst begrüßen hier im Haus der Land- und Ernährungswirtschaft, dem Sitz des Deutschen Bauernverbandes und viele anderen Verbände für die deutsche Landwirtschaft. Ich darf Sie begrüßen auch im Namen der Andreas-Hermes-Akademie, die Bildungseinrichtung der organisierten deutschen Landwirtschaft. Wir werden getragen von 13 Organisationen aus Deutschland. Mein Name ist Andreas Quiring. Ich bin der Leiter, Geschäftsführer der Andreas-Hermes-Akademie und werde heute die Begrüßung machen und dann später weitergeben. Die Akademie hat viele Bildungsaufgaben seit über 70 Jahren im deutschsprachigen Raum und seit einigen Jahren haben wir dank der finanziellen Unterstützung des Bundesministeriums für Entwicklung und Zusammenarbeit die Möglichkeit, uns mit der Stärkung von Bauernorganisationen auch in Afrika und Indien zu engagieren, Erfahrungen weitergeben, Stärkung, Kapazitätsaufbau zu betreiben und zusammen auch mit den Bauern oder den Bauernvertretern auch die Möglichkeit geben, sich über die Themen, die die Landwirtschaft weltweit natürlich pressiert, auszutauschen. Das Podium heute unter dem Titel Shaping the Food Systems of Tomorrow, the Role of Pharma Organizations ist eine Veranstaltung, die schon in der Mitte einer größeren Veranstaltung steht. Seit Sonntagnachmittag sind wir zusammen mit einer größeren Anzahl aus Vertreterinnen und Vertretern von Bauernorganisationen aus Afrika, aus anderen Kontinenten und wir haben uns schon intensiv ausgetauscht. Heute hier zusammen werden wir versuchen, die wichtigsten Erkenntnisse nochmal mit Ihnen allen zu teilen. Wir haben festgestellt, das ist eigentlich keine Überraschung, Bauern sitzen nicht jeden Tag zusammen in Gremien und sind im Austausch miteinander. Die Hauptprofession, die Hauptaufgabe ist eine andere. Und deswegen haben wir gemerkt, es ist sinnvoll, es ist hilfreich, wenn wir die Vertreterinnen und Vertreter von Bauernorganisationen aus verschiedenen Kontinenten, die im letzten 2 Jahren sehr intensiv digital eingebunden waren in den Prozess des Food System Summit, wenn wir sie zusammen einladen, die Möglichkeit geben, auszutauschen, nicht nur einander zu hören, sondern auch einander zu verstehen. Wir haben eingeladen aus Afrika die Vertreter der 5 regionalen Bauernverbände und vieler nationaler Verbände, viele auch mit denen wir schon seit einigen Jahren zusammenarbeiten. Wir haben eingeladen aus Indien und Südostasien Vertreterinnen, die sind leider kurzfristig durch die Covid-Situation nicht in der Lage gewesen teilzunehmen, von daher fehlt es uns heute und fehlte es uns schon die Tage. Wir haben über die Allianz Agricor, in der wir Mitglied sind, haben wir auch noch Vertreter aus Brasilien, aus Kanada und aus anderen Ländern Europas mit dabei, also eine ganze Bandbreite. Und damit Sie alle mal sehen, wer das denn alles war, wäre meine Bitte, dass alle, die die letzten Tage schon am Workshop teilgenommen haben, einmal ihre Hand heben, damit wir sehen, wer das alles gewesen ist. Also alle Teilnehmer der letzten Tage, einmal die Hand heben, damit wir ungefähr sehen, wer dort schon die ganze Zeit dabei war. Herzlichen Dank. Also, wir sehen, da waren viele mit und viele haben tatsächlich auch gesagt, wow, das war das erste Mal seit langem, dass man zusammen war wieder und es war das erste Mal, dass über das Thema Food System Summit und was daraus passiert, gemeinsam gesprochen wird. Denn dieses Ernährungssystem, das Food System, und das war der Anlass für diesen Summit-Prozess, war schon vorher nicht in der Lage, die eigentliche Aufgabe zu erfüllen, allen Menschen in der Welt ausreichend gesunde Nahrung zur Verfügung zu stellen. Und deswegen wurde dieser Prozess angestoßen. Gleichzeitig erlebten alle, wie eine Pandemie auf einmal dieses weltweite Ernährungsthema ganz ordentlich schon ins Erschüttern bringt, wenn Arbeiter nicht aufs Feld kommen, wenn Transportwege durch Lockdowns auf einmal gekappt sind. Und ganz aktuell, seit Ende Februar, merken wir, dass nicht nur durch den Invasionskrieg der russischen Armee in der Ukraine unser europäisches Wertesystem, die Frage, wie wir zusammenleben, auf einmal auf den Kopf gestellt ist und uns die täglichen Bilder sicherlich alle zutiefst erschrecken. Es hat auch was mit Ernährung zu tun und die Angriffe sind auch ein Angriff auf ein Stück weit die Kornkammer Europas. Und wir merken es schon jetzt, steigende Preise, Knappheiten werden leider, so sind alle Prognosen, auch dazu führen, dass mehr Menschen nicht genug Nahrung haben und wir damit alle zurechtkommen müssen. Also es gibt viele Themen, die wir miteinander zu besprechen hatten. Die 2 Tage bisher waren schon sehr ergiebig. Wir haben uns darüber ausgetauscht, wie jede und jeder Einzelne in den nationalen Dialogen, in den internationalen Dialogen, in den verschiedenen Facetten, in denen dieser Food System Summit Prozess abgelaufen ist, involviert waren und merkten, dass es sehr unterschiedlich war. Wir haben auch darüber gesprochen, was denn der Blick nach vorne ist, denn dieser Prozess ist noch nicht vorbei. Im Gegenteil, es geht jetzt viel darum, auf der nationalen Ebene weiter umzusetzen. Wie soll das konkret ausgestaltet werden? Und die Frage, die wir uns gestellt haben, die die Vertreter der verschiedenen Bauernorganisationen sich gestellt haben, wie wollen wir uns engagieren? Wie wollen wir das vonstatten gehen lassen? Für was wollen wir uns engagieren? Was sind unsere Ziele? Wie sollen wir uns vernetzen? Wie sollten wir möglichst wirksam werden? Und der Botschaft am Ende war, let's be in the driver's seat. Also nicht am Zaun stehen und zugucken, nicht am Tisch sitzen und bedient werden, eher in der Küche sitzen oder, so wie es für die Landwirtschaft besser passt, auf dem Trecker sitzen und das Steuer in der Hand halten. Also mit diesen Vorstellungen sind wir heute Mittag erstmal zu einem vorläufigen Abschluss gekommen und darüber wollen wir heute mit Ihnen allen sprechen. Wir haben für das Podium eingeladen verschiedene Menschen und in dieser Zeit ist es leider immer so, dass dann doch noch einige absagen müssen. Deswegen schon ein Ausblick. Wir hatten uns gefreut, dass der neue gesamtafrikanische Bauernpräsident von PAFO, Kalyong Palabele, mit dabei sein wird. Er musste leider kurzfristig absagen. Wir hatten Shamika Mono mit eingebunden. Sie ist die Vertreterin der Biobauern weltweit, aus Indien kommen. Sie musste leider absagen. Wir hatten die beiden Ministerien hierzulande angesprochen. Das Landwirtschaftsministerium hat viel probiert, konnte leider doch nicht mitwirken an dem Podium. Und aus dem Entwicklungsministerium gab es heute Morgen noch eine kleine Änderung. Herr Lesch, der angekündigt war, konnte nicht dabei sein. Herzlichen Dank, Frau Keffel-Rühle, dass Sie eingesprungen sind und heute, Sie haben eigentlich eine ganz einfache Aufgabe. Sie vertreten nur die gesamte Bundesregierung. Also wir sind froh, dass Sie heute hier sind. Das soweit zu der Beteiligung. Wir werden beginnen mit einem kleinen Input. Wir werden beginnen mit einem kleinen 10-minütigen Input darüber, was nochmal die wesentlichen Inhalte des Summit waren und welcher Spielraum, Gestaltungsaufgabe sich daraus ergibt. Und dazu freuen wir uns sehr, dass Frau Christel Weller-Molunga uns über Video gleich dazugeschaltet wird. Sie kann leider nicht persönlich hier teilnehmen. Sie ist uns über die Aufgabe aber schon immer sehr lange verbunden. Sie ist Abteilungsleiterin ländliche Entwicklung und Agrarwirtschaft der GEZ. Und sie hat selber im Namen der deutschen Bundesregierung an dem Food System Summit Prozess teilgenommen, war an der Leadership-Gruppe im Action Track 1 zu dem Thema verbesserter Zugang zu gesunder Ernährung. Wir freuen uns sehr, Frau Weller-Molunga. Ich hoffe, das klappt jetzt mit dem Dazuschalten. Wir sehen Sie jetzt schon alle hier, Frau Weller, und freuen uns sehr von Ihnen, nochmal aus Ihrer Erfahrung und Perspektive einige Blickwinkel, vor allem auch mit dem Blick nach vorne zu bekommen. Herzlichen Dank, dass Sie uns zugeschaltet sind und dieser Veranstaltung den ersten Input, den Aufschlag machen. Ich übergebe das Wort an Sie und freue mich auf das, was wir von Ihnen hören werden.
Dankeschön, Herr Quirin, und einen herzlichen guten Nachmittag nach Berlin an alle Teilnehmerinnen und Teilnehmer dieser Veranstaltung und auch schon der Diskussionen der letzten 2 Tage. Ich wäre sehr, sehr gerne persönlich anwesend, aber Ich freue mich auch über das Digitale und ich freue mich auch darüber, dass wir die digitalen Möglichkeiten inzwischen so gut und selbstverständlich nutzen können. Und wir wissen alle, das hat ja auch seine Vorteile. Erstens, eine breite Partizipation weltweit zu ermöglichen. Herr Quirin, Sie hatten es eben dargestellt, wie viele Zuschaltungen hier aus aller Welt stattfinden und auch damit unseren ökologischen Fußabdruck immer wieder zu verbessern. Das heißt, auch mal eine Reise einzusparen, ist durchaus eine Herausforderung. Das physische, persönliche ist sehr schön, aber dennoch hat das Digitale auch seine Vorteile. Ich bedanke mich sehr herzlich für die Gelegenheit, hier meine Eindrücke aus dem UNFSS-Prozess mit Ihnen teilen zu können und auch einordnen zu können. Zunächst aber auch noch mal kurz ein Blick auf die derzeitige Situation. Immer mehr und breiter wird klar, dass die Transformation unserer aktuellen Produktions- und Ernährungssysteme der Schlüssel zur Verwirklichung der Agenda 2030 und der Erreichung der Ziele für nachhaltige Entwicklung ist. Aber wir haben keine leichte Aufgabe vor uns. Denn eine Transformation muss nicht nur ökologisch nachhaltig und sozial gerecht sein, sondern auch ökonomisch umsetzbar und transparenten Governance-Kriterien entsprechen. Und diese Aufgabe wird in der derzeitigen Situation immer komplexer. Uns ist allen klar, dass die Welt so ein Stück vom Kurs abgekommen ist und das SDG 2, Hunger beseitigen, derzeit in die Ferne rückt. Die Zahlen werden nicht besser, sondern schlechter. 2020 litten 811 Millionen Menschen unter Hunger und mehr als 2,3 Milliarden Menschen waren von Ernährungsunsicherheit betroffen. Die Zahl der Hungernden ist mit Covid stark gestiegen. Und Herr Quirin hat eben auch schon den Angriffskrieg von Russland auf die Ukraine und dessen Auswirkungen auf die Ernährungsunsicherheit und die Nahrungsmittelverfügbarkeit sowie die Preiskrise erwähnt. Das heißt, sowohl die Pandemie als auch die Ukraine-Krise sind massive zusätzliche Herausforderungen für die Ernährungssicherung und die Erreichung von SDG 2 ist dadurch stark gefährdet. Die dritte große Last und Herausforderung ist der Klimawandel. Die Landwirtschaft ist dabei Verursacher und Betroffene gleichzeitig. Neue Studien zeigen, dass 1/3 der CO2-Ausstoßes, 80% des Biodiversitätsverlustes und 70% des Frischwasserverbrauches durch die Landwirtschaft verursacht werden. Wir alle haben in den letzten Tagen die Diskussion zum Bericht des Weltklimarats verfolgt, der die Dringlichkeit der Situation darstellt und aufzeigt, dass die bisherigen Maßnahmen bei weitem nicht ausreichen, um die Erderwärmung in den Griff zu bekommen. Wir sind daher mehr denn je gefordert, dieser Verantwortung nachzukommen. Es bleiben immer noch wenige Jahre, um hier Fortschritte zu erzielen. 2030 ist quasi übermorgen. In Anbetracht der Gesamtsituation und der Nahrungsmittelkrise bekommt der UNFSS, dessen Ergebnisse nach Abschluss des Gipfels im September 2021 durchaus auch kritisch hinterfragt wurde, mit all seinen Themen eine neue politische Relevanz. Auch die Forderung nach einer höheren Beteiligung von Kleinbäuerinnen und Kleinbauern sowie die Förderung von Frauen und Jugend in ihrer Rolle als Nahrungsmittelproduzentinnen und Produzenten in der Weiterverarbeitung, aber auch im familiären und persönlichen Konsum ist aktueller denn je. Unser Hauptauftraggeber, das BMZ, hat sich klar zur Transformation der Agrar- und Ernährungssysteme und zum Erhalt unserer aller Lebensgrundlagen bekannt. Auch das starke Bekenntnis zu einer feministischen EZ und der Unterstützung der Rolle der Frauen stellt aus meiner Sicht eine einmalige Chance dar, die wir gemeinsam nutzen sollten. Nun aber noch mal ein paar konkretere Einblicke in den Gipfel. Der Food System Gipfel der Vereinten Nationen im September 2021 war die wichtigste globale Konferenz zum Thema Lebensmittel und Ernährung in den letzten Jahren. Die Welt kam zusammen. Vertreterinnen und Vertreter von ca. 150 Regierungen stellten auf der Veranstaltung ihre Pläne und Prioritäten für die Umgestaltung ihrer nationalen Ernährungssysteme vor. Und über 51.000 Menschen aus 193 Ländern nahmen virtuell am Gipfel teil. Alle mit einem Ziel: einen Weg zu einer nachhaltigen und gerechten Umgestaltung unserer Agrar- und Ernährungssysteme zu finden. Das Leitmotiv war dabei People, Planet and Prosperity. Dieser Dreiklang spiegelt die drei Grundprinzipien der nachhaltigen Entwicklung, ökonomisch, ökologisch und sozial, die ich zu Anfang erwähnt habe, wider. Der Anspruch war eine breite Beteiligung und ich bin sehr erfreut, dass einige der Teilnehmerinnen und Teilnehmer hier aktiv an den Prozessen vor Ort beteiligt waren. Eine breite Beteiligung von staatlichen Organisationen, Zivilgesellschaft, internationalen, regionalen Organisationen, Privatwirtschaft, Bauernorganisationen, Jugendvertreterinnen und Vertreter vor Ort etc. Begleitet durch ein intensives Forschungsteam, das die Vorschläge und Ergebnisse immer wieder auch mit der Forschungsperspektive betrachtet hat. Jeder war eingeladen, seine Ideen und Meinungen einzubringen. Das ist nicht immer voll und ganz zur Zufriedenheit aller gelungen. Es gab da durchaus auch kritische Stimmen. Insgesamt wurden allerdings mehr als 2000 Ideen im Sinne von erprobten Solutions, das hat auf der Umsetzung auf dem Terrain funktioniert, eingereicht, die zur Veränderung der Produktions- und Ernährungssysteme und damit letztendlich zur Erreichung der SDGs beitragen. Welche konkreten Ergebnisse wurden erzielt? Der Gipfel hat in vielen Ländern der Welt einen Anstoß gegeben, ihre Politiken und Maßnahmen zur Verwirklichung der SDGs neu auszurichten. Mehr als 100 Regierungen haben nationale Dialoge abgehalten und nationale Pathways entwickelt, die Herr Quirin eben auch schon erwähnt hatte. In diesen nationalen Pathways werden die Absichten und konkreten Planungen zur Umgestaltung der Produktions- und Ernährungssysteme in den kommenden Jahren dargelegt. Burkina Faso zum Beispiel hat sich verpflichtet, das Recht auf Nahrung in seine Verfassung aufzunehmen. Es wurden einige neue globale Initiativen ins Leben gerufen. Zum Beispiel die Zero Hunger Initiative, eine Initiative zum Thema Lebensmittelverschwendung, zum Thema gesunde Ernährung, Agrarökologie, existenzsichernde Löhne, Schulmahlzeiten, Blue and Aquatic Foods Initiative und landwirtschaftliche Innovationen gegen den Klimawandel. Häufig haben sich diese Initiativen auch mit dem Thema Anreizsysteme beschäftigt. Es ist wichtig, die richtigen Anreizsysteme zu schaffen, zum Beispiel existenzsichernde Löhne und auch zum Beispiel Rekompensation für Ökosystemleistungen. Große Themen wie die Warenkosten bzw. der wahre Wert von Lebensmitteln, der Druck auf die Bodengesundheit und die Ozeane sowie die zunehmende Ungleichheit und der Hunger wurden in den Vordergrund gerückt. Neu und für mich persönlich die wichtigste Veränderung war der holistische Ansatz. Raus aus den Silos, Agrar- und Ernährungssysteme ganzheitlich denken. Wichtige Aspekte dabei sind, dass unsere Produktions- und Ernährungssysteme auf lokaler, regionaler und globaler Ebene umgestaltet werden müssen. Alle waren sich einig, dass One Size Fits All nicht passt und eine Anpassung an den lokalen Kontext, an die lokalen Perspektiven notwendig ist. Raus aus den Silos heißt auch die Verbindung zu anderen globalen Vereinbarungen klar und transparent bearbeiten. Pariser Klimavereinbarung, Biodiversität, Menschenrechtskonventionen müssen aktiv mit einbezogen werden. Die COP in Ägypten ist ein erster Schritt dazu. Es wird da erstmalig einen Food Day geben. Raus aus den Silos heißt auch, die SDGs insgesamt holistisch denken und bearbeiten. SDG 2, Hunger beenden, hat klare Verbindungen zu SDG 1, Armut, SDG 3, Gesundheit, SDG 6, Wassermanagement, SDG 14, nachhaltige Fischerei und Nutzung der Meere, SDG 12, Konsum und Produktion, um nur einige zu nennen. Was geschieht nun mit den Ergebnissen des Gipfels? Um die Rechenschaftspflicht zu gewährleisten, soll der Generalsekretär bis 2030 einen jährlichen Bericht vorlegen und alle 2 Jahre eine Bestandsaufnahme der Fortschritte bei der Verwirklichung von nachhaltigen und gerechten Ernährungssystemen einberufen. Das ist eine große Aufgabe, denn hier muss von den lokalen Ebenen über die Länderebenen bis auf die globale Ebene der gesamte Veränderungsprozess betrachtet werden. Ich persönlich blicke auf 12 Monate Engagement im Action Track 1 zurück und der Geist der Arbeitsgruppen war außergewöhnlich. Alle waren sich einig, es ist immer noch möglich, alle 17 Entwicklungsziele zu erreichen. Aber kein Land, keine Organisation kann das im Alleingang schaffen. Die Umgestaltung der Agrar- und Ernährungssysteme erfordert die Unterstützung aller Akteure, insbesondere auch der bäuerlichen Organisationen. Vor diesem Hintergrund freue ich mich besonders, dass es so viele Mitunterzeichnerinnen der Erklärung der bäuerlichen Verbände mit der Forderung nach mehr Beteiligung an internationalen Prozessen wie dem UNFSS gab. Es ist wunderbar, dass heute so viele persönlich präsent, aber auch zugeschaltet teilnehmen und die vergangenen Tage zusammengekommen sind, um im Sinne dieses globalen Aushandlungsprozesses weiter zu diskutieren und die Themen voranzubringen. Die GIZ wird weiterhin mit zivilgesellschaftlichen Akteuren und anderen Partnern zusammenarbeiten, um das Thema auf den globalen Agenda zu halten und die Phase nach dem Gipfel zu unterstützen. Ich lade Sie alle ein, sich zu beteiligen und Ideen beizutragen, wie nachhaltige und gerechte Agrar- und Ernährungssysteme für alle gewährleistet werden können. Ich hoffe, ich konnte verdeutlichen, Business as usual ist keine Option. Konkrete, wirkungsorientierte und breitenwirksame Aktionen sind gefragt. Nur so wird der Change gelingen und die Chance, die Agrar- und Ernährungssysteme resilienter zu machen, steigen. Ich wünsche uns allen eine weitere spannende Diskussion, einen intensiven Austausch und bedanke mich für die Einladung. Dankeschön.
Herzlichen Dank, Frau Weller-Molunga, für die Einführung, für den nicht nur Input, sondern auch für die Orientierung, die Sie uns damit nochmal gegeben haben. Einige hier im Saal haben sich vielleicht die letzten Tage mit ganz anderen Dingen beschäftigt. Dafür ist es gut, ein Stück mit reinzukommen. Andere haben sich die letzten 2 Tage schon damit beschäftigt und haben auch durch ihre Ausführungen nochmal einen anderen Blickwinkel erhalten. Von daher herzlichen Dank für die Mitwirkung an der Stelle. Herzlichen Dank auch für Ihre Unterstützung über die vergangenen Jahre. Sie waren von Beginn an bei unserem Engagement mit dabei. Auch dafür ein herzliches Dank und einen Applaus hier aus dem Saal. Wir kommen jetzt zum zweiten Teil, der Podiumsdiskussion. Wir haben vorhin schon gesagt, nicht alle Referenten konnten für das Podium mitwirken, aber wir haben trotzdem ein hochspannendes Podium, das jetzt die Fragen aufgreifen wird. Und wir haben eine ganz besondere Moderatorin dafür einbinden können, Desiree Ditford. Die ist Moderatorin, AHA-Trainerin, ist schon sehr lange mit dem Thema der Bauernorganisation, vor allem in Afrika, unterwegs. Gestern wurde geschrieben, sie hat das Herz der Landwirte, was sie mitträgt. Und von daher, liebe Desiree, du wirst uns heute hier durch die Moderation führen. Du wirst auch die Gäste hier empfangen. Lieben Dank, dass du das machst. Wir sind gespannt auf eine rege Diskussion. Bitte sehr.
Danke, Andreas. Ja. Dann würde ich, I can speak English because you will be translated. I'm actually from Holland. And you know, we Dutch people, we always adapt to whatever language we are supposed to be speaking. So, but now I speak English and I'm going to invite and introduce our panelists. And I would like to start with Werner Schwarz, who is the Vice President of the German Pharma organization and the president of AgriCourt. Yes, we're going from left to right. Second, I would like to invite, you can sit down, Werner. I would like to invite Lisa Kirfel-Rührig, who is the, oh gosh, who is the vice head of the Department of Sustainable Agriculture in the Federal Ministry of Economic Cooperation and Development. Welcome. Third, we have Theo de Jager, who is president of the World Pharma Organization. Then I would like to invite Elizabeth Nsimadala, who is president of the East African Pharma Federation, and until last year she was president of the Pan-African Pharma Organization. And last, we have Michael Windvoer, who is acting director of the Institute of Human Rights. Please. Welcome to this panel. Yes, we heard from Crystal Welle-Mulunga about her appreciation of the fact that farm organizations have played such a big part in the UNFS process. I'm sorry. So, Elizabeth, I would like to start with you. You have been part of many international activities and have spoken on many international platforms, first or last year as president of the Pan-African Pharma Organization, but also as president of the East African Pharma Federation. Now, after all these experiences, what would you say now is the role of pharma organizations in these processes and as part of these platforms? And maybe more importantly, do you see a change over time? Do you feel that pharma organizations are becoming finally more visible in these international contexts?
Yeah, thank you very much, Desiree. And it's really an opportunity for me to be before this audience to discuss the important issue at the center of the global discussion, which is food. And maybe before I respond to your question, can I see from the audience, by show of hands, who had food today? Anyone who had food today? By show of hands. So can we raise the second hand and give a thunderous clap to the farmers? Yeah. So thank you very much. And I want to say that last year was a very important year, especially on the side of the farmers. It was the first time that we saw the world coming together on the same table to discuss issue of food. And that's when we as farmers, we realized that we were actually the greatest and the most important stakeholders when it comes to discussions around food. It's the first time that we saw attention being given to the farmers who produce food on a daily basis. When I look at the role that we played during the UNFSS food systems, it's not different from our day-to-day role that we play. First of all, when the UN Secretary General declared 2021 as the UN Food Systems Summit, and we were called on by the special envoy. I remember when we were in Rome, we had a Global Farmers Forum that was organized by IFAD. That's when we met with a special envoy, and he requested that we as farmers organizations will be part and parcel of the process. We felt that we had moved a step in terms of being recognized as players in food systems. And at that point, we said as farmers organizations, what do we need to do differently? And I think the most important thing was for us to be the farmer's voice, because that is what we do. Our core mandate is to represent the interests of our farmers. So we made sure that we brought the farmer's voice on the different tables. We did a lot of lobby and advocacy. It was not easy to have our issues as usual, part and parcel of the discussions. But we made sure that we made what I would call a lot of noise and made sure that we are everywhere. I remember when I was appointed on the advisory committee and my colleague Esther from AFA, we made sure that we had a number of our other colleagues appointed in the other structures of the UNFSS, like the Champions Group. We made sure that at least we had representatives in the different action tracks that were discussing issues to do with food systems. The other role that we played, and I feel we will continue to play in the Food Systems Summit, was information flow and creating awareness. There's one thing having information, but the other thing having that information reach the intended audience. There was a lot of information at global level because this was a global kind of a global process. It is something that was a top-down approach. So we made sure that whatever discussions that happened at global level, we used our different structures to make sure that that information reaches down our constituency. We did a lot of awareness creation. We ran a number of campaigns. There's even one which is still ongoing. I know it was championed by the World Farmers Organizations, Farmers for Food Systems. So if you saw our presence on social media platforms, it was prominent by all the different farmers organizations. Our outreach was enormous, making sure that at least our farmers get to understand what is this UN Food System Summit that we are talking about. Then the other point, or what I would call the last point, was on mobilization. Mobilization in terms of the partners. Like you heard from Weather, the UN Food Systems process used a holistic approach where we had to work as actors, as an ecosystem. So we made sure that in all the dialogues that we organized, we were actually leading in terms of organizing independent dialogues. We brought on board all the different actors from different sectors, the researchers, the extension, the private sector, government who are in charge of policy. So we made sure that we take lead in terms of mobilizing all those actors. We needed to have evidence in terms of what we are presenting as issues. So all those actors were relevant to be on the same table with us to make sure that whatever we are presenting has backup with evidence. We also mobilized resources. Internal resources within our organizations. We used our own structures to make sure that we reach out to our constituencies, but also resources in terms of financing. We held a number of dialogues. We were lucky that it happened at a time when globally we were hit by COVID, but again, we exploited the importance of digitization. So there was no movement of people, but at least we used virtual infrastructure to make sure that we reach out to a number of our farmers. Thank you.
Thank you, Elizabeth. So you've been very active. And you have managed to bring the voice of your farmers to the table, apparently, not in one, not in two, not in all platforms and in all groups and all dialogues. But I would like to ask Michael now, the farmers, of course, that Elizabeth is talking about are those farmers that are organized, that are parts of organizations. And we all know from a development perspective how important it is that farmers are organized. I would like to ask you, of course, many farmers are not part of an organization. And today we had in our workshop the nice statement, some of these very poor people who are themselves food insecure. Our farmer organization said, we first have to create awareness that they are in fact farmers. You are a farmer. Some of these people are just surviving from day to day, and they survive from the field and from what they grow and harvest. And they don't even consider themselves as farmers, let alone becoming a member of a farmer organization. And yet, these are the food insecure people that the UNFSS process is also aiming to benefit. What would you say on how we can bring the voice of these unorganized yet very deserving and people to the table of this process?
Yeah, thanks a lot. And maybe I start by saying, if you look at UN statistics, you find a lot of statistics. But if you want to have an exact figure on the number of farmers or family farmers on the world, you don't find an exact figure, because nobody is really having good statistics in rural areas. And this is one of the problems, that farmers work in rural areas which are often forgotten areas in national politics, but also often in international politics. 525 million farmers are there. This is the formal FAO figure. I checked it in advance. This would, with all the families, estimate to something between 2.5 and 3 billion people, which would be roughly 1/3 of world population. Yeah? If you look at, for example, national budgets, how much attention is given to farming population in budgets, it's a disaster. Yeah, the African heads of states of the African Union gathered in Maputo in 2003, and they decided that they would spend 10% of their national budgets for rural development. It's now 9 countries which has achieved this. So from 54 countries. So 45 countries are spending less than 10% of where most of their population live and where most of the hungry people is. That is one of the reasons why, and you are pinpointing to this in your question, why 70 to 80% of those who are hungry are living in rural areas. Yeah? And this is astonishing. The food is coming from the farmers, but you have also a lot of hungry people in rural areas, and this needs to be explained. This has to do with that normally in many states the institutions working in rural areas are not really functioning. They are often lacking. You don't find good land catasters. You don't find even a good weather service or somebody forecasting effects of climate change on certain areas. Regional planning or spatial planning, which takes on board interest of farming population, is often very weak. I could go on access to credits and so many access to, let's say, education, which makes many young people leaving rural areas. So this is all a problem which is at the back. So what is really needed is that farmers get a strong voice. Yeah. I'm mentioning both areas, the national area, because I'm a human rights expert working on the right to food, right to organize yourself. This is lacking in many countries. They need a much stronger voice there. And then it needs to be reflected at the international level. Yeah. So the second question you were raising is, are they now adequately reflected in UN structures? And is the UN Food Systems Summit leading to this? This is the second question. I would say they are not adequately reflected. Yeah? Well, I know first you say many are not organized. That is fully true, because also rural areas are missing the capacity also of these institutions, which are extremely weak. Farmers' organizations, locals are often very weak. Yeah? There's also sometimes a split. I know that there are more farmers' organizations which has tried to influence at least the processes at the FAO, at the Committee on World Food Security. There's also a group of farmers you are collaborating with sometimes, but you have also sometimes problems with them. So there are different voices in farmers' organizations. And my understanding is the problem rural areas and farmers' organizations are facing are so large that you need to come to a more stronger voice. in the UN system because it's very much overseen. If you go now around and you look to the different summits which will come up, even if there will be a food day at the next climate summit in Egypt, there is now this biodiversity summit going to be happening in China. If you go around these summits, farmers' voices are sometimes heard, but not
Often
adequately. Yeah, so this central element of saying we can't negate 1/3 of world population, let's say, in rural areas, is one of the largest problems. Yeah? And if you look for all the policies for climate adaptation, they're considering about many things. They might maybe build dams around golf courses at the end, but if they will build building dams around fisher communities, this is another question. So these voices needs to be heard. This having said, was the UN Food System Summit now an opportunity? Yes, I think it was an opportunity to raise also the concerns, and Elisabeth was just describing how much possibilities you have. But in order to have a long-lasting impact on the different policy fields which are relevant for farmers, I think there needs to be more, let's say, systematic approach vis-à-vis this, and the UN is far from having farmers really accept it. It doesn't help that maybe there are different groups, those who are working at the CFS, those who worked at the UN Food System Summit. I would maybe start the discussion today by saying we need a strong call for collaboration in this aspect, because otherwise you are not heard. And that means also collaboration with other persons living in rural areas, fisher folk, pastoralists. And sometimes the UN Food System Summit talks about food as a totality. Then you talk also about industry, about traders, but farmers are often forgetting, even in policies, even in trade policies. It was so difficult to raise the concern of, let's say, poor rural communities in trade negotiations. It's often the interest of traders and maybe the food industry which is pursued. We still have so much tariff escalation. Why 99% of our cocoa is still processed in Europe? There is something behind this. We need to discuss these issues, and therefore we need a strong farmer's voice. Maybe I start with this, but I can dive in many of these aspects. with you.
I'm sure you can. So the engagement has improved, but it is far from perfect. And part of it is we have insufficient information also about where these farmers are and what their problems are. And part of it is we need to mobilize them and they need to become part of structures. Otherwise, it's very difficult to hear them. But maybe some talk to different groups of people, and if we build alliances of all those people that are trying to assist this voice coming up, then maybe we manage to, by being complementary, to do that a little bit better. Now, I would like to go to Werner Schwarz, because the German Pharma organization has been very active in this UNFSS process. And I was wondering, maybe you can tell us what exactly were the ingredients of success in doing this, and are there any lessons to be learned from that experience that can be adapted elsewhere, or can that success story be replicated in other countries, for example, the countries of Africa? Please.
Vielen Dank für die Frage. Ich möchte voranstellen, dass die Bauernverbände so verschieden sind wie die Bauern in der Welt. Und es gibt kein Idealbild eines Bauernverbandes. Aber es gibt ein paar Punkte, die vielleicht zu einem Erfolg führen. Ich will nicht sagen, dass wir als Deutscher Bauernverband das alles umgesetzt haben, aber ein paar Punkte gibt es, die ich vielleicht nennen möchte, die ich für wichtig erachte. Ganz wichtig ist die Unabhängigkeit als Verband. Unabhängigkeit bei der politischen Ausrichtung. Wenn ich mich an eine politische Gruppierung binde, dann bin ich gefangen. Ob ich nun eine regierende politische Richtung habe oder eine politische Richtung in der Opposition, ist ganz schwierig, das dann auch bei wechselnden Situationen wahrzunehmen. Unabhängigkeit, da gehört auch die finanzielle Unabhängigkeit dazu. Das heißt, im Idealfalle habe ich Mitglieder, die Beiträge zahlen, die mir als Vertreter des Bauernverbands oder der Organisation Unabhängigkeit in finanziellen Fragen beschert. Denn wenn ich gesponsert bin, dessen Brot ich esse, dessen Lied ich singe.
Ja, ja.
Insofern, ja, das ist ein ganz, ganz wichtiger Punkt. Aber es geht auch in der Unabhängigkeit in dem Generieren von Wissen. Wir hören heute häufig auf Stimmen, die laut sind, die schnell sind, die nach außen dringen. Wir haben es gerade in diesem Seminar der letzten Tage gehört, Professor von Braun hat es gesagt, selbst die Stimme der Wissenschaft ist nicht einheitlich. Und Wissenschaft ist nie an einem Endpunkt. Auch dort brauchen wir Unabhängigkeit in dem Generieren von Wissen, was wir dann vertreten. Wäre aus meiner Sicht vermessen, ich habe es eingangs gesagt, zu sagen, das System Deutscher Bauernverband ist gut oder ist wertvoll zu kopieren. Aber es gibt ein paar Punkte, wo wir in den letzten Jahren einen Wandel herbeigeführt haben. Wenn ich einige Jahre zurückschaue, dann haben wir ganz häufig reagiert auf Vorgaben der Europäischen Union, auf Vorgaben der Bundesregierung. Wir sind inzwischen dazu übergegangen, wenn wir merken, dass Themen aufkommen, Biodiversität, Klimaschutz. Beim Klimaschutz nenne ich gerne immer das Modell des Moorschutzes. Da müssen wir was machen. Da sind wir auch als Deutscher Bauernverband dran gegangen, haben dieses Thema aktiv aufgegriffen, haben eine Strategie für zum Beispiel den Moorschutz entwickelt und ihn an unsere Regierung übermittelt. So sind wir in der Diskussion drin. Einer aus der Gruppe in diesem Prozess der letzten Tage hat gesagt, invite yourself. Ich glaube, das ist ein ganz wichtiger Punkt. Nicht warten, bis man gefragt wird, sich zu antworten oder zu reagieren, sondern sich selbst einladen in den Diskussionsprozess. Und das kann ich auf verschiedenen Ebenen machen. Ich glaube, das ist ein guter Weg. Theodor Jager sagt manchmal, Advocacy, okay, but go beyond that. Vielen Dank.
Thank you. Yes, well, listening to what you're saying, financial and political independence, being proactive, preparing your own position and strategy papers for themes of the day like climate change, and then making sure that you're invited. Those are the things that actually make the German Pharma Association successful in having their voice being heard. Now, I would like to ask Theo, if you listen to that, how many hurdles do farm organizations in much of Africa, or maybe even in other parts of the world, which you know maybe as president of the World Farm Organization, how far are farm organizations away from this? Is it possible for them to move in that direction, to be similarly successful, to learn from these experiences? What would farm organizations need to do, in your view? What can they do to help themselves?
Is this on?
Yes.
You know, Desiree, no two farmers in the world farm the same. No two farmers' organizations in the world organize farmers in the same way. No two countries do it. No two continents do it. Farmers is such a diverse group. And yet it's probably the only profession that is really organized in a way in which we can source wisdom and experience from farm level and communicate it to a global level and back again in a matter of days, because the structures have been designed in such a way. Of course, there are farmers' organizations which are very weak, very poor, which simply do not have the feet on the ground to get to real farmers and find their mandates there and send it up again. There are countries which do not have a farmers' organization at all. There are countries which do not want a farmers' organizations because governments think they are political opposition. And there's a lot of work to be done in those countries too. Some of the strongest producers in the world are not members of the World Farmers Organization simply because they are not independent of government. And it's very important that you hear the true voice of the farmers when you consult them, and not the government behind them or the financier, the donor, the sponsor behind them. In this Food System Summit, and if I can really try to translate it in farmers' language, the world came to a point where we said, the food system has not changed for many centuries. People became more and more, moved to the cities, and today can be academics and engineers and architects and policemen because there are still enough farmers to produce the food. There was a time when everybody had to do it for themselves. But the food system has evolved in a way which has a certain impact on the well-being of humans, our health, our societies, but also on the planet, on biodiversity, on nature, on climate. And maybe we should rethink both what we produce and how we produce it. Not only on the production side, but also on the consumption side and everything in between, hence the systems approach. And in the beginning, the farmer's voice was not very clear in this debate. It was not very clear simply because farmers did not have a place around the table, and it was really a struggle to get a place around the table. Actually, we said as farmers, don't simply invite us to dinner. We want to be in the kitchen. We want to be part of the planning of this menu. It's not good enough to sit around the table. We want to bring content to this debate. And then it was also important to help some farmers' organizations to develop policies before we can influence policies. To influence policies, you need to have it. And to have policies, farmers must agree on certain common purpose. That's not an easy task. To get farmers across the globe in all the different production systems to agree on how their interests should be covered. We needed to empower certain structures, and that empowerment had to come from those structures which already have more than a century of experience in it. Hence, when we came to the Food System Summit, we realized that many of our farmer structures and many of our approaches are outdated. If a fairy could land on my shoulder today and give me one wish for mainstreaming farmers' organizations for the post-summit, the 2022 debates, I would wish for the communications officers to become in the most senior echelons of decision-making. Communications became so important for us as farmers who never had to do it before. We did not enable ourselves to communicate both with our own members, because not all farmers are taking part in these debates. You have to communicate with a grassroots farmer who wants to know what is the implication of these debates for me on my farm here and today. They are very practical people. But also the communications outwards, to speak to the world, to speak to the most important people in our lives, those who buy our food in shelves and shops, and to say to them, we are here to feed you, not to kill you. We are as serious about the planet as anyone else, maybe even more so. We live closer to nature than anyone else. And we want to find the solutions, find the answers on all these difficult questions on our footprint, on our pastures and our fields. We want to find it with you. Because the answers to which we come up, whether it is on health, whether it is on our footprint in nature, must still be valid in 20 years from now, and 50 years from now, and 100 years from now. At least one thing I think we can be proud of, and that is we came out of this Food System Summit without any farmers' organizations who took part. I do not talk about those who right from the start said, we do not want to be part of it. Those who went into the system, we came out without having lost one farmers' organization, without anyone taking a position counter to the mainstream, without anyone who have not in some way adapted to make sure they can answer the most difficult questions. And with more farmers' organizations on all levels up to continental level than what we went in with.
Very good. That's encouraging, certainly. But when you spoke about empowering structures and the importance of communication and the importance of developing a policy in order to influence policy, developing a position in order to influence policy, I wanted to ask Lisa Keerful-Rühle. These are processes that farm organizations have to go through in order to become ever more heard, in order to become ever more successful. As a representative of the Ministry of Economic Cooperation and Development, do you feel that those processes that farm organizations have to go through can be supported from outside? And if so, what are good approaches? What is your experience there? What would work?
Yes, thank you. Can you hear me? Is that working? Yeah. So first of all, thank you very much for this very, very good opportunity to talk to each other personally. So great thanks to Andreas Hermes Academy to organize this event. It's really very nice. I was really looking forward to have a real meeting again. So hope to talk to you after this session. And to underline absolutely the important role of farmers, not only for food producing, but to protect nature, to keep all this world running. So I think we get more and more to the point where we're really aware of this functional services farmers do provide. And so Michael Windfor was already mentioned, the climate COP and biodive COP, this all belongs together. And I think policymakers get more and more aware of that even here, the voice of farmers need to be heard. So what are we going to do on the political level? As you can see here, we support this program, and we're absolutely convinced that it's important to support Andreas Hermes Academy and partner organizations in our partner countries to better organize and to support the demands of farmers' organizations. So this we see that financial independency is crucial, but we are on the background of the SDGs absolutely willing to fund this. And I think there's a broad range of opinions where we can agree upon, and so I think there is a certain independency. So I think for the German government, I can absolutely signal this continuous support for it. On the other hand, we do work, of course, on international frameworks where farmers' organizations will more and more play a role, and cooperatives and other kind of associations of farmers or their voices. So as you can see with the hopefully maybe not so strongly upcoming food crisis, we will see how strong it will be. The multilateral level will be strengthened, so there is a crisis response at the moment. And if we go to IFAD or to the World Bank, and I think take IFAD, you mentioned already, or somebody mentioned it, this is a program, this is a fund where farmers' voices are heard, and I'm absolutely convinced that if we support IFAD further, and we are absolutely willing to from the side of BMZ, this is a more a multilateral response. In the G7 Food Security Working Group, we do as well make the connection to the UNFSS with the Zero Hunger Coalition, and we just had yesterday a meeting of the group, and the experts were all as well underlining the role of farmers' organizations. So I hope G7 partners will see this and work on it, so we engage ourselves on that level. And COP27 was already mentioned. Let's take the opportunity in Sharm el-Sheikh to have a loud voice for agriculture and for farmers. And I hope the Egyptian partners will be in line, but would be interesting to know in how far in Egypt farmers' organizations play a role. For example, this is, I don't know, I'm not a specialist in that. Yeah, I mean, that's perfect. So I hope there will be an event with them. So far, thank you very much, and I'm looking forward to further cooperation with Hemis Academy and all your partners from our partner countries. Thank you.
Well, I'm sure that would be very useful if Germany uses its leverage that it has at the G7 and the G20 and the COP26 to always emphasize the importance of having farm organizations also at those platforms and in these meetings. I'm sure that is a very, very good way of making sure that farm organizations and farmers are heard. Now, Theo, you talked about this UNFSS process and how it maybe started with a bit of, obstacles, and how you had to fight for a place at the table, and how that initially was not even very much appreciated, but you actually got it, the place at the table. Now, farm organizations were one group of stakeholders, right, in this UNFSS process, but there were others. There was civil society, governments, there was the scientists. And from what you told us in the workshop that we just had is that there was quite a bit of conflict between these various groups of stakeholders. Can you maybe elaborate on that a little bit and tell us, were those conflicts resolved? Could that be, does the process of the UNFSS have contributed to a consensus creation among those groups of stakeholders with very different interests?
I'm afraid to say 1 or 2 days of discussion at the Food System Summit will not resolve all the tension in our food systems. Our food system is way too complicated for that. From your personal experience, when you walk into the grocery store, how much food do you find on the shelves that comes in that form from a farm? Most of it has gone through some form of processing. And there's a big company who has done that processing. The fresh produce, the shortest chain from the farm gate to the consumer's plate, is actually something very special and rare. So there was a lot of wrestling between the representatives of farmers, especially your smaller and medium-sized farmers, and the CEOs of multinational companies. And there are a handful of them who really own the food systems. And a lot of it boiled down to tension on the demands from the farmer, the standards which we need to abide by, issues on trade, and then, of course, what we should eat. There was a massive tension between those who believe in animal-based proteins and those who feel that the transformation of the food system should mean the replacement of animal-based proteins with plant-based proteins. And there are so many reasons for it: health, the footprint on nature, and also the moral story, the blood argument, people who feel we should not kill animals to eat them. And it always starts with a debate and legislation on animal welfare, which is a good thing. But then it becomes animal comfort or animal happiness, and then animal rights and the right to live and not to be eaten.
Animal wellness.
So
Okay.
in this debate, the real issue is power in the value chain, power in the food system. Let me explain it to you in this way. When I was young, and all those with the same color of hair that I have, when we were in more or less in high school, there was a big debate in the world between butter and margarine. Margarine being the plant-based alternative to butter, with exactly the same arguments. It is healthier. Even today, margarine is advertised as the healthier alternative. But also, it has a lighter footprint in nature. And then, of course, this animal rights thing. But behind it is the fact that any smallholder farmer in Uganda or in Cameroon who owns one cow can make butter. But to make margarine, you need a big factory, complicated technology, massive infrastructure for distribution. It's a handful of companies who can make margarine. So moving away from animal-based proteins to plant-based proteins also means moving away from the smaller entrepreneur, the smaller owner and decision maker to the big companies and the multinational groups. And that was a real issue in the discussions around the food systems. Today still, as we sit here, agriculture represents the broadest basis of entrepreneurs in the world. People who make a business decision every day to earn a livelihood. And I think this is something we should cherish. Certainly in the World Farmers Organization and in our partners on the various continents, we feel very strong that more should be invested in the UN's decade for family farmers. Simply in order to make sure that we have a rural alternative for urbanization.
Thank you. Yeah, that's an interesting point. It stays with me. A farmer with one cow can make butter, but for margarine you need an industry. Something to think about. I took that with. But now I'll turn to Elizabeth again, and on another issue. Now, we've had the UNFSS process, we've had the dialogues, we have the pathway documents, where countries have put down their good intentions for the way forward towards a future with stable and sustainable food systems in which farmers earn a living wage and where people are enjoying a healthy diet. So those papers are there now at country level. Good intentions. There doesn't seem to be a whole lot thought as of yet having gone into how to implement this, how to monitor it, how to be accountable for it. So maybe there is still a little bit of a vacuum where you as farm organizations can craft out a role for yourselves. So you've taken part in the dialogues, but what is your role as farm organizations in the implementation of action under those country-level pathways? And how are you going to go about ensuring that that role falls to you and that you take on that role and that responsibility as a farm organization and pull this thing into practice?
Yeah, thank you, Desley. And I would like to say that what has been happening previously may happen again, much as we had a process that was very inclusive, that was diverse, that came up with all these good pathways, national pathways, over 100 national governments participating in this UNFSS process. Even right now, as we watch, we can as well say that the momentum has really reduced. We had everybody, the whole of 2020, 2021, singing about the UNF Food System Summit. But after the pre-summit and the real summit, I think the momentum has gone down. So as farmers organizations, how do we make sure that, we keep the momentum? But also not only keeping the momentum, but we make sure that whatever commitments that were done by the different actors are put into action, including ourselves, because we had a global position as farmers organizations on the commitments that we are going to offer from the farmers constituency. And one of the things where I see that we have a role to play is on making sure that we hold ourselves accountable, but we also hold other actors accountable. How do we hold ourselves accountable? As farmers, we committed that we are solutions. By being solutions is to make sure that, we farm in more sustainable ways. And this is what we are ready to do. As farmers' organizations, this is what we are ready to support our farmers with, making sure that we farm with methods that are sustainable to nature. Giving different options. I'm not going to say this is the best option because farmers have to be given options. But whatever options they choose to, they must respect nature and be sustainable. Then on the other hand, the national pathways, yes, are there, but there is no clear path on how these are going to be implemented. Because there is no budget from our national governments or any other UN structures that is clearly dedicated to the implementation of the outcomes of the UN Food System Summit. Even when you look at, for example, the hub that has been created at FAO level, this hub has staff that have been out of secondment. And I believe some of these staff maybe don't have the enough technical capacity to even follow up on accountability and implementation of some of these outcomes of the Food System Summit. So this is where we feel that our government should incorporate some of these national pathways into the already existing structures to see how, we can create synergies so that we are not coming up with independent different structures, but the national pathways are complementing the work that is already happening at national level. For example, at continental level, we have CADAP in the Africa perspective. In EU, for example, you have the Green Deal, you have the Farm to Fork strategy. So how do we make sure that all these outcomes fit into those existing strategies? How do we make sure that these national pathways are also delivering, for example, on CADIP? My colleague here mentioned about the allocation of
Comprehensive Africa Agriculture Development Program of the Africa Union.
Yes, sorry, I forgot to mention it in full. Thanks for that help. I had in mind that everyone understood.
Everyone knows
CADIP. Yeah, so he mentioned about, for example, the 10% allocation to the agriculture sector by our national governments, but that is not happening. So how do we make sure that these, for example, national pathways act as a catalyst to make sure that, our governments increase the allocation to the agriculture sector? Because we are tired of the usual talks, and I think it's time now to move from rhetoric to action. And I hope this is going to come out. And as farmers, our commitment is to make sure that, we will support the process at national level, and we will be part of this process because everything around food rotates around farmers, and we believe we are the solutions that everyone is looking for. Everyone is targeting to work with farmers, and we are ready. We are committed to work with everyone.
Michael, you wanted to add to this.
Yeah, maybe I start to be a bit critical with this process. If I remember, the UN Committee on World Food Security was created 1974 when there was another food crisis. And then there was a talk shop. Every year the states met, and then they were bringing up good examples how they managed to come forward. And this was a show where you can say some states reported about some progress they made in some areas. But there was no systematic addressing of the underlying problems, that they are not spending enough in rural development. So it was then renovated to the new CFS when there was another food crisis in 2008, saying we now more systematically have to engage the overall UN system in getting the right responses. I think this is a process which has started, but is a bit stuck. It was not becoming fast enough because maybe also industry and other actors were not really willing to invest into this. Now we have the UN Food System Summit, and we heard they have already gathered 200 or 2,000 practical ideas how to do it. And I'm afraid that again, while we are starting to tell 200 examples what works, other forums are making the decisions. Trade policy, the value chain discussions which you have mentioned, Mr. De Jager, or maybe take the climate negotiations. Yeah? I recently read the report of Shell, how they are going to become carbon neutral in 2015. They are proposing that they are going to offset 6.2 million hectares by planting trees, just to lower their carbon emissions and make their own CO2 budget carbon neutral in 2015, because institutional investors demand from all companies now to be carbon neutral in 2015. So they all make plans, and they all are planning how many hundred thousands or millions of hectares they are going to offset. But where is this land? There are people living on this land and working on this land. Yeah, you can just not use the same land which you need for smallholder farmers now for carbon offsetting of big companies. So the conflicts will be there, and they will be large, because climate change will dramatically alter the ways how farmers can produce, which areas are fertile, where there is enough water. And we have to make sure that when states start planning how to deal with these problems, they don't overlook farmers. And this is my big threat. Therefore, I'm coming from a human rights perspective, say farmers' organizations, they need to have the voice. And because they have been so much often overseen in national politics, the risk is there that climate policies and other policies are designed without taking adequate care of those who are poor or living in rural areas. I know, my second point, not all farmers are small, but you need a unique voice. That is what I'm saying. Yeah, you can, and you have to find ways how you can articulate this together. So I think also you need a hub in the UN system for rural areas, I would say, or for farmers as a constituency. And maybe it's good to combine the outcome of the UNFSS, the Food System Summit, with the CFS structure. And I can only call to our government to make a strong player that you bring these aspects together. You need a house where these good examples can be implemented. And you need a house which is loud enough to be heard in the climate negotiations, or when they are talking about climate adaptation, or when institutional investors decide on where to do carbon offsetting. I think these voices needs to be organized, yeah, and we are still far away from this. So the UN Food System Summit raised a lot of ideas, but having a political voice in the UN system, that needs also some states supporting this process. Yeah? So maybe if there would be alliances between South Africa and Germany who can say, let's take rural areas seriously, let's get them a voice, and not just being used for something like carbon offsetting or other processes, or for more maybe energy crops. Yeah? We are talking about Ukraine and Russia being now no longer being able to supply 32 million tons of cereals, which is their export, yeah? Which is 1/3 of the export. But you have to see that we are also burning 120 million, I just checked it before this, 100 million tons for agrofuels in the US. Yeah? And there's also a figure for Europe, which I don't know at the moment. Yeah? But these are showing the large amounts, and we have to make sure land can be used commercially for producing energy. Yeah? And when energy prices go up, the appetite will be increasingly large to take the resources for other purposes. So making sure that those who produce food, smaller farmers in rural areas, get the attention of their governments, but also get the attention internationally, is so much needed. Otherwise, it will be very difficult to defend them. So it needs really supporting governments also who takes your voice seriously. And Germany could be one, but also South Africa could be one, yeah? Or maybe other countries, Ghana or others, who might raise this up. But this alliance needs to be built, and it needs to be built soon, yeah? Because the changes will come up dramatically. Yeah? The UN, the UNFCCC, the climate summit paper which came out yesterday, was saying we have 30 months to change the course. So the time pressure will be there. And making that your voice is heard, I think, is extremely important in this. Yeah? Otherwise, the policy decisions will be made without farmers. And I think that is not good, because then we will have maybe industrial solutions or other types of logics looking at land and rural areas. Yeah? And we need to defend those 2.5 billion living there. Yeah?
Desiree, can I please also
Oh, you want to please say something? Then you please say something. And then after that, and I'll announce it now, because looking at the time, we also wanted to give the audience an opportunity to ask some questions. So you add to what Michael is saying, and then I ask from the audience if there's any questions. Go ahead, Theo.
Part of the problem is really just the structure of this function in the UN. We have the Commission for Food Security that stands on two pillars. There's a private sector mechanism and the civil society mechanism. But there's no farmers' organizations. WFO has no seat at the Commission for Food Security. And actually, one cannot think that it could have been designed this way. We do not fit into the civil society mechanism, although many of our members and some of the farmers' leaders who are sitting here in the audience today come from countries where they only have smallholder farmer structures which may be able to fit in there. We also do not fit into the private sector mechanism because in there are the big chemical companies, the banks, the fertilizer companies, the seed companies. There should have been a third leg for the producers, but it's not there, so the voice is not being heard. We are delivered to the invitation by the chairman, if he would invite us. Of course, we have stopped knocking on his door. We are now kicking on his door and say, the farmers must be there. But then, we sit in a process where much the same debate takes place, UNFCCC. Both SABSTA, which is usually in Bonn around May, and then the COP process. When we started off with this debate, based on the Kyoto Protocol, agriculture was not even mentioned in that protocol. There was one very vague reference to food security. Nothing about farmers, nothing about the food system. Then we started to work very hard. Some of my colleagues here will remember how many hundreds of hours we have spent to ensure that agriculture become part of the replacement of the Kyoto Protocol in Paris. We were not satisfied when we left Paris. We felt that at best there was a little door in which we could get in. And then all hell broke loose 3 years later, and everything that is wrong with climate change is being blamed on farmers. But, you know, somewhere a massive shift happened. And now we feel that we must defend all the time instead of coming up with solutions. Hence, we took this decision in Katowice. Let's no longer wait for the politicians to give us an opportunity to say something. Let's grab the microphone. And we did it by launching the Climakers campaign. And Climakers was simply an effort to go to every farmers' organization we could find on the face of the world, asking them to host a workshop for their region, small islands in the Pacific, the Caribbean islands, every corner of the world. And we asked farmers, really drill down to grassroots level. What do you think you can do on your farm to tread a little lighter on your fields and your pastures? What can you do, both on the mitigation side and the adaptation side, to make a contribution? And then secondly, what will it take to get it done? Knowing that the answers from Oceania will be vastly different from the answers in North America, and the answers in Africa will be different from the answers in Europe. Because we said right from the start, there will be no silver bullets. There's no one-size-fits-all solutions to this. But the idea is to exchange these solutions, because farmers learn more from other farmers than from anyone else, and then to compile, call it a climate-smart production Bible. To say to the politicians, to the parties, this is what farmers believe we can do, and this is what it will take to get it done, and put the ball in their court. And then let them chase after the policy as we have been chasing up to now. So the key word for us in this frustrating environment where we try to influence policies on a global level is to go beyond advocacy, to kind of grab the initiative and put a peg in the soil and say, this is where we stand, and let that be attacked instead of trying to get a place around the table.
Yeah, that is a very good proactive. I think we should learn more about that initiative, and maybe that can also work as an example in how this UNFSS can be implemented, the resolutions that were made under that process. But I have more questions to you, but before I would ask them, I would like to ask our audience if somebody has a question for our panel, just to give the opportunity. I see one hand very far. Oh, I see a lot of hands now. But there's a lady in the back. I think it's a lady. Black hair, yes. That's the first hand I saw. I'm sorry. Maybe we'll go for her first.
Yeah, it's much more of a comment than a question. Didem Eidemusch from Die Linke. I have a problem with this butter versus margarine thing. Like, why are we opening binary oppositions? I actually Googled how to create margarine, and it's easy, so it can easily be fact-checked on Google that it is easy to make margarine. So beyond the emissions from butter is one of the worst products. So let's not start comparing butter. It needs a lot of water. So the farmer in the global south already has a problem with getting enough water to the cow to then get butter, where they rather can get milk, right? So I don't really understand defending butter with its incredible ecological footprint. And the market is already shifting, right? We do see a market shift from animal products to actually vegan products. So if we walk around behind the market, we have a problem, right? The big corporations are making all the profit margins, and then smaller farmers are left behind. So it's actually better to advise the smaller farmers to make the shift now. So now they still have agency. So I kind of think of it as from being one of the most destructive forces now, and you said that very correctly, many people blame farmers unjustifiably for climate change. We can actually be a force to be climate heroes. So just a comment, I think it's very unnecessary to create a binary opposition. Let's work together, we live on one world.
Thank you for your comment. Let me get another question. Okay, you there? Yeah. Yeah, that lady, because you're near. Yes, Steffi, yeah. From France.
On a parlé beaucoup d'organisations agricoles pendant ce séminaire. Et moi,
Can you give us a small moment so that our panelists attach their...
Ah. Il faut attendre.
Yes, go ahead.
C'est bon. Ma question, oui. Voilà 2 jours qu'on parle d'organisation agricole, et moi je voudrais parler d'organisation des sommets aussi. Et on voit qu'au gré du temps, de nombreux sommets sont organisés avec des thématiques qui dépendent de l'actualité et de l'émotion du moment aussi. Et est-ce que vous qui avez participé à plusieurs sommets mondiaux, vous sentez une articulation claire entre ces différents sommets? Est-ce qu'il y a une logique, une stratégie qui se dessine? Est-ce que ça pourrait être autour du changement climatique qui semble aujourd'hui prendre vraiment de l'importance sur l'ensemble des autres thématiques, parce qu'il nous faut en tant qu'organisation agricole aussi percevoir cette stratégie mondiale si elle existe, si elle se dessine véritablement, avant de pouvoir proposer des choses à partir de la base. Et je donne un exemple d'où me vient cette question. Par exemple, nous avons eu dernièrement un sommet Europe-Afrique et nous sommes intervenus avec les organisations agricoles, notamment de France, et puis aussi les partenaires dans différents pays, pour dire mais c'est anormal que l'agriculture passe au second plan derrière des questions de sécurité, de mobilité, de numérique, alors que l'agriculture est si importante encore aujourd'hui dans le développement et encore plus en Afrique. Et donc on peine à voir la logique entre ces différents sommets internationaux. Est-ce que vous la percevez, cette logique et cette stratégie?
Okay, so whether there's a logic behind the international summits, and I also gathered from your question whether there is an emerging consensus around common areas of concern from all these summits that maybe farm organizations can then respond to and be prepared for and react to. But before we answer that, there was one question there. Maybe you can still answer your question, and then those 2 questions can be answered. The lady in the back, I'll leave that as a comment. No, sorry, here, I actually, yes, the gentleman in the, here. Marcel, yeah.
Oui, bonjour. Alors, c'est bien. 2 questions en français. Vous n'aurez pas besoin d'ajuster vos casques. Moi, c'est une question très simple. L'ONU n'a pas vraiment de pouvoir. Elle tient des sommets, mais elle n'a pas vraiment de pouvoir, sauf un pouvoir d'influence. J'observe le Canada. Il participe à ces sommets-là. Il donne l'impression d'y donner suite, mais rarement les actions concrètes vont dans le sens des orientations des différents sommets. Est-ce que ces discussions-là sont vraiment utiles? C'est une question très simple.
Very straightforward question, very clear question. So I would just, there is a bit similar, those questions. So before I take more, I've seen you, Babacar, I've seen you. Before I take more, let me ask our panelists, whoever wants to answer, about is there a logic to all these summits and the areas they address? And also, are there common areas of concern that are emerging from these summits that farmers can make themselves prepared for? And then, are they useful at all, these discussions? Because sometimes, after having made these commitments, nothing happens. Nothing is actually implemented underneath these commitments. Who wants to answer? Yes, Lisa.
Well, I didn't take part at the UNFSS, but I think in the whole discussion on the background of SDGs and the necessary transformation of agri-food systems towards sustainability, and of course climate change is a major driver. It's just the big push which changes basically everything, and the big time pressure. We did observe some voices which we could, maybe it's our lenses, we wanted to hear that, but we would summarize that we heard voices from Latin America, which were towards agroecology and smallholder family farming. So there was somehow a bit continent-wise voices we perceived, and we will take home and work on it. And in Africa, we have our agenda of fight against hunger and innovation and general development support. That was what we heard. And from Asia, it was blue economy and climate change. Mm-hmm. So we took that away, and think it's very valuable, that it was thoroughly discussed, and nobody could say, well, this is posteriority or that is neglectable. So we take all that serious. Then we had support of women. We had raised, I think this is anyway undetestable. So maybe one impression to your questions, right. Where are common, where could be common points.
So certainly you've identified certainly a consensus around key issues, geographically spread maybe, but a consensus nevertheless. Thank you. Michael?
Well, the question, are these summits meaningful? International politics are decisive for each farmer. Yeah, the trends which are set on prices, like on trade policy, impact you. Even decisions maybe of the European Union to export certain products or having subsidies here and there, they are all influencing your policy. And if there will be climate negotiation, as I said, which allow carbon offsetting to a certain degree, it will impact the prices on land in Canada. So you can't say we are just isolated, we do it our own. In that sense, therefore it's good that your voice is also heard. Yeah. I don't believe that there is one logic behind, because you have interests, yeah, and you were saying this already, yeah. But it's important to find maybe a voice or supporters for your position, if there is a position like this, to support family-based smaller farmers, which are trying to do a production which is in the long term sustainable, yeah. Mm-hmm. And I think that is what matters, yeah. Like, there is no decision about butter and margarine. If you're a smallholder producer in Uganda, you don't affect the climate change with your one cow. But if you are systematically importing millions of tons of soybean just to produce hundreds of thousands of pigs and animals on an industrial base, it might be problematic. Yeah, so farmers are firstly the victims of climate change. Don't forget this. The rural areas will change dramatically, and it needs enough thinking about how to defend those living there. But those parts of the agricultural system which contributes to maybe being the causation of climate change is not necessarily smallholder farmers. This needs to be differentiated. We have to think about how farmers can exist. We can find solutions which are climate or sustainable, but which also is maintained or developed with farmers. I think that is important, that we don't replace things. Yeah? Look for industrial solutions which are climate friendly. They will not work, because they will not help us, because then we replace people living in rural areas, and we might produce carbon friendly soybean for animal production, but at the same time we produce more people being hungry because they don't have any income. That it needs to be brought together. Yeah? We have to think about also that these 525 million families need to produce an income. This is important, otherwise we will never come to a solution for SDG 2, ending hunger in 2030. We have 8 years left. Yeah? So I think we have to look into those people who needs to have an income, and this needs to be stabilized, yeah? And this needs to be brought together with sustainability. Otherwise we are lost in the debates. Yeah? So you have to take care of these impacts, and you have to find allies. Canada, maybe your government, and Germany, to say, please bring this perspective into international negotiation and do it consistently in the climate negotiation, in the trade negotiations. That is what I was proposing.
Maybe that is why the current focus is on food system and not on food or on agriculture or on climate, but on system, so that you capture these interlinkages in the system. The ones that you talk about. We can't import soya and then have other people go hungry. So if you look at it from a system perspective, you might actually capture what you do in Europe and the implications in Africa, vice versa. Babak, you have been waiting for a question for a long time, so let's hear it.
Merci. Donc félicitations à tous les gens qui nous ont donné de brillantes présentations avec la modération. Moi, je suis africain, je suis sénégalais.
Wait, just a moment. The translation is not working. Oh, the microphone was not working.
Okay.
Maybe you can mention who you are and from which organization.
Voilà, donc, je suis Babacar Diop. Je suis agropasteur. Je suis sénégalais et je suis responsable des organisations paysannes au Sénégal. Bon, j'exerce mes activités au niveau des exploitations familiales agricoles. Je fais partie des avocats. Alors, je pense qu'on a parlé, mais le contexte, on a eu même à écouter l'exemple des changements climatiques, et ainsi de suite. Mais on a oublié un contexte, surtout au niveau de l'Afrique, c'est l'immigration clandestine. Pourquoi ces jeunes viennent envahir vos pays? C'est parce qu'ils n'ont pas la possibilité de travailler chez eux. Et pourtant, l'agriculture peut drainer beaucoup d'emplois. Mais le questionnement principal, si je suis exploitation agricole, avant de penser à nourrir d'autres personnes, il me faut se nourrir. Si je n'ai pas la possibilité de régler ma propre nourriture, je ne peux pas nourrir les autres. Pourquoi je ne le peux pas? Il faut interroger les politiques agricoles. Il a dit tout de suite, les engagements de Mapito, c'est des engagements de 20 ans. Est-ce qu'on a la possibilité, avec les OP, de suivre et d'évaluer ces engagements? L'exécution de ces engagements, c'est une exécution à dents de scie. Il n'y a pas une permanence au niveau des pays africains liée aux 10%. Qu'est-ce qu'on doit faire? Donc on a besoin d'un sursaut et d'une révolution au niveau de l'agriculture. Et Najirou, qui est président du CNCR, qui est membre du Conseil économique et social au niveau du Sénégal, réclame depuis 2 ans les assises de l'agriculture au Sénégal. Si on organise des assises au niveau des pays africains, nous aurons au moins des pistes de solutions qui peuvent nous permettre de défendre nos positions. Mobilisons-nous, renforçons nos capacités d'organisation, informons-nous pour jeter une révolution au niveau de l'agriculture africaine. Merci.
Thank you. That is an idea on going forward, to have national conferences or a platform at which farm organizations can all come together and look at the way ahead in their country. Do we have another question? Because I think that was a comment. Yes, the lady there.
Vielen Dank. Vielleicht setzen Sie Ihre Kopfhörer doch wieder auf. Ich würde es gerne in Deutsch machen. Mein Name ist Petra Bennkemper. Ich bin Präsidentin des Deutschen Landfrauenverbandes und der Deutsche Landfrauenverband setzt sich seit über 70 Jahren für die Rechte von Frauen und ihren Familien in den ländlichen Räumen ein. Und unsere Wurzeln liegen in der Landwirtschaft und deshalb haben wir auch ein besonderes Augenmerk auf die Frauen in der Landwirtschaft. Und wir sehen, dass sie eine ganz, ganz wichtige Rolle spielen. Frauen sind oft Innovationstreiber auf den Höfen. Sie sind wunderbare Botschafter zwischen Erzeuger und Verbraucher und deshalb, das macht auch so unsere Erfahrung, die wir in Ghana gemacht haben, aber zeigt ganz klar, Frauen brauchen mehr Förderung, brauchen mehr Unterstützung und meine Frage geht in die Richtung, was wird getan, um Frauen einfach mehr zu fördern, denn sie spielen eine wirklich wichtige Rolle. Dankeschön.
Sehr wahr. That's very true. Does any of our panel want to answer? Elizabeth, what is being done to support? Sorry? Yes, okay. How do we support women in agriculture? We'll take another question, we'll leave this, and then we'll go and answer the 2 or 3 together. Who has another question? There? Also, now you're near to the microphone. Richard? Richard, also tell us who you are.
Thank you very much. I'm Richard Semwangat, the president for the Young Farmers Federation of Uganda. Whenever I see a word sustainability, what comes next is the youth, or the young people, or the young farmers. But the youth we are talking about, they have quite a long period of time been complaining for lack of access to land, lack of access to agricultural finances, lack of access to market, lack of access to technology. But these are the people who are supposed to sustain the food systems we are talking about. So my question is, are there specific interventions that specifically cater for the youth or for the young people at a global level, such that these youth can easily engage in agriculture and they will sustain the food systems we are talking about? Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you. So we have support to women and support to youth. Do we have one other question? There? Lady with the glasses.
Thank you. My name is Tina Huvio. I'm not from the farm organization, but I'm from AgriCord, so supporting them strongly. I would like to follow a bit the line that was mentioned here by Sophie and Marcel, and what Michael from the panelists took up. When we talk about food and the Food System Summit, there were a lot of platforms, there were a lot of initiatives. I heard very little pledges for funding. When I went for COP27, there were huge numbers of more money floating. I would like to ask now from the farmer representatives in the panel, do you feel that you have access to all that funding that is now floating around? And from the donor representative, I would like to ask, would you be willing to help the farm organizations to have better access, for example, to climate funding, which seems to be so complicated that, for example, in West Africa, the farm organization said that earlier, when there was a flood or drought, there was money then to fix everything. Now there's climate funding. It takes 2 years to get anything, and mainly it's just the indicators and list of measurements, and you don't see the funds. So this is my question. Thank you.
It's a very interesting question. I'll leave it to the panel now to answer. Maybe we should hear first from our Pharma representatives, activity or initiatives to support women and youth. What is ongoing, and we can also hear from BMZ and from. Keep it short.
Take the first bite at the apple. There are at the moment, amongst our members, 28 national farmers organizations, of which the president is a woman. Women has forcefully stepped into the gaps in advocacy, both on international, on continental, on regional, and on national levels. And Elizabeth is a good example. Not only is she a woman, she's also a young farmer. She very often speaks. We often hear her voice as the voice of the youth in agriculture. But it's not the only importance of women in this debate. I said a little earlier that the most important people in our lives as farmers are consumers. And in the organized consumer sector, it is mostly women with whom we engage on all levels, also internationally, also on the multilateral platforms, but even on a local level. In a family, it is mostly the mother of the family that takes responsibility of nutrition in that family. So the art for us as producers is to win the hearts and minds of the consumers. And for that, you need to talk to women. That's why it was so important that the voice of women was heard loudly and clearly in the debates in the Food Systems Summit. When it comes to the youth, we always say to the youth that you must run into the gaps as they open up. We cannot do it for you. We can at best try to create those gaps. And one of the ways in which we try to create it, in the World Farmers Organization, we have set up our gymnasium. In this gymnasium, the brightest young minds in agriculture, about 26 of them, meet 8 times in 2 years. And we visit Andreas Hermes Academy. We come to the GFFA and the Green Week. We take them to the General Assembly of the UN, to the Commission of Food Security. We really take them to the hot spots of the food debates. And we force them to discuss all those issues which we are hesitant to discuss ourselves. There are certain issues which I can tell you from first-hand experience. In organized agriculture, you don't go there. You don't talk GMOs amongst the farmers of the world. You don't talk subsidies. It is hard to talk trade. But the youth can. And in this way, we do not only expose them to the other side of the argument, we also empower them to address these issues in a different way than what we have done. Actually, what we are trying to do is we are trying to ensure that in 15 years from now, in 20 years from now, the leaders of farmers' organizations will be better equipped to do the job that needs to be done than what we are today. And if I can just say one thing about the climate question, which was also raised here.
The money.
Any form of transformation costs a lot of money. And it's difficult for a farmer to build a bridge between what he's doing now and how he needs to do it better if there is no special financing mechanism to do it. It will not be done if he does not have the access to that funding, or if it is so hard to access it that he would rather give it up. And in building these bridges, you need specialists. You need a structure like the GIZ. or AgriCord, who are experts in doing that. And that kind of financing needs to have two trademarks. It must be patient and sympathetic capital. We need money at softer conditions than what is available in the market, over longer periods of time than what is readily available in the market. Farmers want to do better, but they cannot afford to do it if they do not have access to this softer forms of capital. And my fear is that what we have today does not really address that. No need to do it through grants. If it's done through grants, the return on that investment is usually not worthwhile. But if you help the farmer to set up his business in such a way that will also make business sense to him, we need softer loans over longer periods of time.
I think Werner wanted to add to that.
Vielleicht eine Ergänzung zu dem, was Theo de Jager gerade gesagt hat. Wir stellen fest, dass sich die Ziele der Förderung, der finanziellen Förderung wandeln. Und zwar relativ schnell wandeln. Und damit glaube ich schon, dass es einen Zusammenhang gibt mit diesen ganzen, mit den Konferenzen, Food Systems Summit und Fragen der Welternährung insgesamt. Dadurch ändern sich die Ziele. Und wie es in einer Allianz wie AgriCord, wir müssen damit arbeiten. Denn wir versuchen als Bauernverbände finanzielle Mittel zu erschließen für Bauernverbände, um sie, zur Hilfe zur Selbsthilfe zu geben. Aber eben immer wieder mit leicht veränderten Zielen. Das ist durchaus ein Punkt, wo es dort einen Zusammenhang in der Diskussion gibt. Danke.
I'm looking at the clock and it is past 5, so I would like to do a little roundup here in the panel. And actually, I was thinking maybe I could ask every panelist very briefly to maybe highlight one key opportunity that the UN FSS process has given us that we should definitely make use of, but also one key risk of the UN FSS process that we should definitely avoid. If you can just each name one key opportunity that we should make use of and one key risk that we should absolutely avoid. Who wants to go first? Yes.
One key opportunity is what Joachim von Braun yesterday said. They have die haben entwickelt ein wissenschaftliches Forum. Da gibt es wirklich mit großem Zuspruch der Wissenschaft, da gibt es Chancen, Riesenchancen. Mhm. Die Schwierigkeit, die ich sehe, ist, dass viele Papiere produziert werden und wir Bauern uns manchmal fragen, wo ist hands-on?
Ja, genau. Who wants to go next? Lisa?
Yes, thank you. So I think the role of farmers' organizations could be itself an opportunity after UNFCS, so that they would monitor maybe the process and how far these national pathways will be integrated into national policy. So be a babysitter for us in a way and point on us and say, here, you should do your homework. So I think this is an opportunity. But of course, it's the risk is that it's a lot of work. So thank you.
That's a good one. Bring in accountability and you can hold others accountable. That is definitely an opportunity. Theo?
I think the greatest opportunity that opened up in the Food System Summit for us is in the implementation phase. There's a lot of complaints that not much has been implemented, but we have set up institutions such as the Sustainable Livestock Coalition, and where nobody stepped forward to run it, we raised our hand and said we will coordinate it as farmers. So we can be the change we wish for. I think one of the greatest threats to us is probably the issue of centralization of power, the role of big companies, especially when big companies also become producers and farm large tracts of land. You see a big company who starts farming, they do not support the local bookkeeper, the local lawyer, the local agent for fertilizers or agrochemicals in a town. And very soon, towns start to collapse. So they do not really contribute to the economic foundation of the rural areas. And I think as farmers' organizations who are based on family farming businesses, we need to guard vigilantly against the centralization of power.
Very good. Elizabeth?
Yeah, I think what I see as the greatest opportunity is the alliances that have been created as a result of the UN Food System Summit. Initially, we've all been working in silos, but this is an opportunity where all the expertise by our different constituencies is on board, and I think it's an advantage that we can take off. Then what I see as a challenge, we've seen participation in the UN Food System Summit at different layers: national level, regional for regional organizations and regional economic communities, the continental level, and also global level. But when it comes to implementation, the implementation is, as it stands now, is at national level through the national pathways. So I don't see a role going forward that is going to be played by these key actors at regional level and continental level and other levels. And I think it's something that we need to think about and see how that opportunity can also, support the implementation at national level. Thank you.
Yes, thank you, thank you. Michael?
Well, the opportunity definitely is that the system is thought together. Yeah, that you have the whole system in mind, and I think this is a bridge which can be used, and it has not forgotten farmers, at least. Yeah, the risk I see is where is the hub which brings rural development and farmers' stories into the center of policy making in the different UN areas. So I call really for having a hub, combining maybe the UN food systems follow-up with the Committee on Food Security, and find maybe a way to how you can work together with those farmers' organizations which are in the civil society forum. You need one voice, a more stronger voice. That is what I can really call for. This is really needed to be not overheard. Yeah? And when there will be money from climate adaptation coming to Senegal, it must be sure that the farmers in Senegal are consulted by their own government, and it's not decided to spend it on anything. It needs to be spent together with the farmers' organizations. And I think these processes we have to advocate for. Yeah? And that needs a strong voice of farmers as a common voice, yeah, to be heard in this process. Otherwise, climate policies and others will be designed maybe without taking adequate care of farmers. And that should be, in my point of view, avoided, because otherwise we will have at the end youth which has no income opportunities, yeah? And then you have maybe smart policies here and there, but you have youth without any jobs, and that is not a good combination. That would be my call.
So the opportunity is that we think system-wide, but the risk is that implementation is lagging behind. Yes. Thank you very much. I know that there are a lot of questions in the audience, but of course we are all now here going to have our dinner, our buffet. And so you've heard the panelists and you know what they stand for. And if you want to ask your question still, then just look them up. That's what they're here for. I'm sure they're very willing to give you answers. Sorry? Oh yeah. Mr. Ruckwied, no? Yeah, you are going to give us a speech. During the... Here? Now? Okay, I thought during the buffet. Sorry. You want to come here and sit on my chair?
We changed and decided
yes.
to be here.
You're very welcome.
Okay, thank you.
No, sit.
Hört man das? Dear ladies and gentlemen, dear colleagues from all over the world, from all over the globe, I warmly welcome you here in the headquarters of DBV, of the German Farmers Union. And it's a honor and a pleasure for us to have you here. We are really glad to have you here, and we are really glad that this meeting is here in Berlin. You are farmers from all over the world, and one thing, it's common. We are facing all the same challenges. For example, mitigation of climate change, food security, how to enable food security. It's about market disruptions, to make food production resilient, and to take care of land, to take care of environment. We have the stewardship of the environment. We are the stewards of environment, and a basis to deal with all these challenges is a strong and vital farming organizations, is a strong and vital agricultural sector, are strong and vital, independent and economically and politically independent farming organizations. And also important is the exchange between farming organizations and the exchange between the farmers, between us, exchange of practice in farming. That's important. And also it's important exchange to transfer this in building up independent farming organizations. And we also need a strong voice all over the globe. A strong voice is WFO. Let me say, our strong voice is Theo de Hager. A special warm welcome, and thank you so much for your excellent work you did and you do all over the globe for the farmers, for the farming families. Thank you so much. DBV and also Andreas Hermes Academy are committed to that concept. Strong, independent, vital agricultural sector, strong, independent agricultural organizations. These are our guidelines. This is our guideline to build up together with you independent, strong organizations to strengthen the farmers all over the globe. As I've heard, you have had a fruitful meeting today, and I'm sure that this will be, for example, a fruitful beginning, starting point, or ongoing working point for fruitful collaboration and for fruitful working together. Thank you for coming to Berlin. I wish you a nice evening, an excellent exchange during the dinner, and us together, a lot of success for speaking up for the needs and interests of our farmings. Again, a warm welcome. Thank you for having you here.
Thank you, Mr. Rückwied, President of the German Pharma Association. And thank you, our panel, Vice President of the German Pharma Association, Werner Schwarz, Lisa, it's so difficult, really, from the Ministry of Economic Cooperation and Development, Theo de Hager, World Pharma Organization President, Elizabeth Nisimadala, President of the East African Pharma Federation, and Michael Windfuhr, Acting Director of the Institute of Human Rights. Thank you very much for being in this panel, And I hope you will find enough opportunity to ask our guests whatever question you have on your mind. Thank you.